there has been massive welfare fraud in the great state of Minnesota. Massive. Over $1 billion of American taxpayer money has been stolen. Just stolen. They can call it fraud, but a better term would be stealing. And this fraud has been centered in the Somali community in Minnesota. Now, I'm not here to criticize the Somali community. I'm here simply to describe what happened. But it is a fact that this $1 billion in welfare fraud occurred almost exclusively in the Somali community in Minnesota and was orchestrated by people with Somali ancestry. That's a fact. Facts aren't racist. Facts are facts.
Senator John Kennedy leans forward with that unmistakable fire in his voice. This isn't just another debate. This is a full-on detonation of truth about one of the biggest welfare fraud schemes ever uncovered in modern American history. But Kennedy's tone shifts. His eyes narrow and the outrage pours forward as he reveals the gut-wrenching betrayal behind the Minnesota scandal. Over $1 billion stolen straight out of the pockets of hardworking Americans, siphoned away through elaborate schemes that turned the state's welfare programs into a cash machine for criminals. This isn't just fraud. This isn't just corruption. Kennedy calls it what it is: clown world on steroids. And as the details unfold, the story ties right back to the political doorstep of Representative Ilhan Omar's backyard, sparking one of the most explosive moments in congressional history. This video breaks down exactly what Kennedy exposed: how deep the fraud goes, who is implicated, and why this moment is sending shockwaves across the country. Let's dive right in.
Mr. President, as you well know, the American people are the most generous people in the entire world. In our country, when you are hungry, we feed you. When you are homeless, we house you. When you're too poor to be sick, we'll pay for your doctor. We spend trillions of dollars a year helping our friends and neighbors who are less fortunate than we are. And that's rare in this world. I've been all over our wonderful world. You have too, Mr. President. And in many countries, if you get down on your luck, they'll let you die in a ditch. But not in America. Not in America. We take care of our fellow citizens. But it's expensive. We spend trillions of dollars a year to do this. And that money that we spend didn't just fall from heaven. We thank heaven for it, but it came out of taxpayers' pockets. And we shouldn't lose sight of that fact, Mr. President. Now, that's why I get so irritated. Irritated is the wrong word. Angry. When I find out that people take advantage of the American people's generosity. It makes me want to knee someone in the groin. It just makes me furious. And I think the American taxpayers feel the same way. What I'm about to tell you, Mr. President, let me apologize in advance, is deeply disgusting. It's deeply disgusting. I mean, it is clown world on steroids. And when I first read about this, Mr. President, I read it a second time because I experienced slap-jawed astonishment. And when I read it a second time, and I realized it was true, I just wanted to run away screaming. What am I talking about, Mr. President? We have discovered, the federal prosecutors have discovered, that for the last 5 years, there has been massive welfare fraud in the great state of Minnesota. Massive. Over $1 billion of American taxpayer money has been stolen. Just stolen. They can call it fraud, but a better term would be stealing. And this fraud has been centered in the Somali community in Minnesota. Now, I'm not here to criticize the Somali community. I'm here simply to describe what happened. The Somali community in Minneapolis is about 80,000 people. They're centered around Minneapolis. And let me say it again. I'm not here to denigrate the Somali people or people of Somali ancestry just because of the actions of a few. But it is a fact that this $1 billion in welfare fraud occurred almost exclusively in the Somali community in Minnesota and was orchestrated by people with Somali ancestry. That's a fact. Facts aren't racist. Facts are facts. So far, 59 people have been convicted, 86 have been charged, and 78 of them are of Somali ancestry. That's just a fact. Now, what these criminals did they had three very elaborate schemes. The first scheme was centered on supposedly feeding hungry children in the Somali community. A group, a nonprofit run by some people with Somali ancestry. The name of the nonprofit was called Feeding Our Future. Feeding Our Future. Feeding Our Future went to the welfare authorities in the state of Minnesota, which of course was administering federal taxpayer money, and they said, "Look, Feeding Our Children said, Feeding Our Future said, we want to feed hungry children in the Somali community." And the welfare people in state government in Minnesota gave them the money to do that. It started out very small. But the idea was that Feeding the Future, the Somali nonprofit organization, would take this federal taxpayer money, American taxpayer money, and go to businesses, most of which were Somali businesses, in the Somali community and set up feeding sites where they supposedly would take children to get a hot meal. On paper, it sounded great. As I say, it started out very, very small, just a few $1 million. But eventually, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And more businesses in the Somali community signed up to be feeding sites. And Feeding Our Future, the Somali nonprofit, kept going back to the Social Services Department in Minnesota saying, we need more money, we need more money. And at the height of the fraud, they were spending about $100 million a year. Not over the lifetime of the program, $100 million a year. There's just one problem. There were no hungry children. There were hungry children. They just weren't getting any of the money. And the businesses, many of which were Somali-owned, which were getting some money to feed the children from Feeding Our Future, the nonprofit that was quarterbacking this whole thing, they weren't giving any of the money to hungry children. They were spending it. These businesses were spending it on yachts and vacations and jewelry and furniture for their home. That was scheme number one. But it got worse. The second scheme was supposedly to help people who are homeless. Remember, I said in America, when you're homeless, we'll house you. Well, that's what they were trying to do in Minnesota. A nonprofit was set up, again run by someone of Somali ancestry, and this nonprofit went to a bunch of providers who supposedly were going to provide housing. And they told the welfare authorities in Minnesota that they needed millions of dollars to house people who were homeless. And once again, the program started out small. When they started it in 2020, these crooks started it in 2020, they said, we only need $2.6 million. But then in 2021, they said we need $21 million. And in the following years, they said we need $42 million the next year, then $74 million to feed, or rather to house the homeless, then $104 million a year. Not the total scheme, a year. There's just one problem. None of the money was going for housing. None of the money was going to help people who were homeless. These providers and this nonprofit that was coordinating it just put the money in their pocket.
As the hearing draws to a close, Senator Kennedy's words echo through the chamber with a force that is impossible to ignore. He does not mince words. He does not sugarcoat reality. He lays out the truth with the kind of clarity that cuts straight through the noise. Kennedy reminds the nation that American generosity is not a blank check for corruption. It is a sacred trust between taxpayers and the government that is supposed to serve them. When that trust is violated, especially on the scale of $1 billion fraud, outrage is not only justified, it is necessary. Kennedy stands alone in his willingness to call out the political failures and oversight breakdowns that allowed this fraud to thrive. He refuses to let ideology or fear silence the truth. He refuses to let political correctness bury the facts. He refuses to allow hardworking Americans to remain victims of an elaborate criminal scheme that targeted the very programs meant to help vulnerable children and struggling families. His message is powerful, his stance unwavering. Kennedy demands accountability for every single person involved, regardless of their background, their connections, or their political affiliations. The American people deserve answers, they deserve justice, and they deserve leaders who will defend their tax dollars with the strength and courage Kennedy displayed in this hearing. In a political world often filled with empty speeches and careful calculations, Kennedy's blunt honesty is refreshing. His moral clarity shines through the chaos. He speaks for millions of Americans who are tired of being taken advantage of, tired of corruption, and tired of politicians who look the other way. This moment proves why Senator Kennedy's voice is one of the most trusted in Washington. He brings truth where others bring excuses. He brings accountability where others bring cover-ups. And he brings a fierce loyalty to the American taxpayer that is unmatched. Kennedy is not just exposing fraud, he is fighting for the integrity of the system itself. And in this battle, he stands firmly on the side of the American people.